The lie took 41 seconds to say, and Calder counted every one of them. She stood in the contract hall on Meridian Station, with 200 other people watching the tribunal feed, and on the screen above the shipping boards, Squadron Warden Othric San of the Kessler Mandate raised his long gray hand, palm flat, in the oath posture of the Seven-Banner Accord, and swore that her father had opened fire on a Mandate corvette without provocation, without warning, and without cause. The human survey vessel Spindrift charged its forward battery at range 4,000, San said. His voice was the same voice that had taught her star plotting at her family's own table. It fired first. My picket answered in defense of the lane. 6 humans died because their master chose violence over the law. I grieve them. I knew them. The record will show I speak with sorrow. The record. Ren's hands had gone cold around the rail of the gallery. The Spindrift had no forward battery. The Spindrift had seismic charge launchers for cracking survey cores out of moon ice, throw weight enough to startle a gull, and her father had spent 20 years filing flight plans so clean that lane controllers used them to train recruits. Every person in that hall knew it. It did not matter what the hall knew. It mattered what the banner table accepted into the record, and the banner table was accepting San. 3 adjudicators sat the tribunal, none of them human, because Earth was the youngest signatory of the accord and held observer standing in matters of fleet discipline. The presiding adjudicator was a Valik with a voice like dry paper. It asked whether the Mandate wished to invoke surety. Ren did not know the word then. She learned it in the next 9 seconds, the way you learn the name of the thing that is killing you. The Mandate invokes surety, San said. 6 of my crew stood in the line of human fire. Kessler law binds the offending line to the damage of its blood. The Calder registry is named. The presiding adjudicator did not pause. That was the part Ren would carry for 11 years, not the lie, which was at least a decision, an act with an author. But the procedural smoothness that followed it, the way the machinery of the accord swallowed her family without changing gear. The Velik read from a screen. The Calder line, registered shipwrights and surveyors of Earth, holding lane contracts under accord charter, was struck from the registry. Its contracts were void. Its assets were forfeit to the injured party. Its persons, and here the dry voice did not even lift, were remanded to labor holdings of the Mandate's designation until the surety debt was discharged. 38 names scrolled up the screen. Ren read her grandmother's name, her mother's name, her brother's name, her little sister's name, the names of cousins on stations she had never visited, an aunt who had married out of the trade 20 years ago and still carried the registry mark, and, fourth from the top, her own. The condemnation was broadcast live on the Accord civil band, which meant her mother, 2 decks down in the family's leased hall, watched her own name burn off the registry in real time, and the Mandate provosts were already at the door when the screen finished scrolling because the seizure orders had been cut before the testimony was given. That was the second thing Ren learned that day. The verdict had been written first. The trial was its packaging. They took the hall in 12 minutes. Provosts in dull copper armor, polite the way machinery is polite, peeling people away from each other with gloved hands and reading allocation numbers off a slate. The holdings were assigned by lot, they said. 38 people, 9 destinations, no appeals. Her grandmother Edda, 81 years old, drew a fiber mill on a Mandate client World 11 jumps away. Her mother drew an ore-sorting station Ren had never heard of. Her brother Tam, 14, stood very straight and got one hand on Ren's sleeve before a provost moved him down the ramp. And the last thing he said to her was not goodbye. It was the family's old docking checklist joke, lines green, sister, and then he was a shape in a crowd of shapes. Her sister Bren was 9. She was holding the model of the Spindrift their father had printed for her birthday, and when a provost took it away as unregistered forfeit property, she did not cry. She looked at the provost the way her father looked at a bad weld, like something that would have to be fixed later, properly, by someone who knew how. Then she was gone too, allocated, a number on a slate going down a different ramp. Ren drew Hollow Reach. Hollow Reach was a bondyard on the moon cask, 4 jumps inward, where condemned lines and debt-sold crews broke retired hulls into saleable plate. She rode there in a transport with 40 strangers, and somewhere in the second jump she stopped shaking, not because the fear had passed, but because it had finished moving in. It had become a tenant. It paid its rent in clarity. Her father was dead. Her uncle Rolf was dead. Marin the pilot, Osi the Cortec, the Vasquez brothers who had crewed for Calders since before Ren was born, dead, 40 days dead, killed at the Serene Shelf, where the family had been running a mineral survey under a lane contract so routine that her father had taken his youngest brother along to train him on the new core rig. Dead, and now, by the sworn word of a family friend, guilty. The Accord did not have a court that would hear a condemned line. Earth had filed a protest and been thanked for its submission. The record was closed. The record was closed. Wren was 19 years old, and she lay in a bondyard bunk her first night on cask, listening to the breathing of strangers. And she took the sentence apart the way her father had taught her to take apart a fault report, word by word, looking for the load-bearing member. The record was closed. But a record is not a verdict, her father used to say. A record is a thing made out of paper and signal, written by hands, stored in places, copied, certified, stamped, carried. A record can be closed the way a hatch can be closed. What mattered was who held the wrench. She did not decide that night to destroy San. The thought would have been ridiculous. A bondyard girl against a decorated squadron warden of the mandate, and Wren had been raised by surveyors who are professionally allergic to wishful thinking. What she decided that night was smaller and harder and would turn out to be the whole war. She decided that the record was wrong and that somewhere, in a controller's archive, in a fuel ledger, in a customs office, in the sealed cores of Sand's own ships, the true record still existed, written by instruments that no reason to lie. Machines had watched the serene shelf. Machines watched everything. The Accord ran on logs the way a body runs on blood. Her father had fired nothing. Somewhere, a log knew it. Find the logs, she thought, and fell asleep with the cold patience that would frighten people for the rest of her life, though she never once raised her voice. The yard at Hollow Reach ran 3 shifts under sodium light and a sky the color of dirty tin. Wren cut plate for 2 months before the yard noticed her, and the yard noticed her because of the manifests. Bondyards bleed money through bad paperwork. Hulls come in misdeclared, plate goes out miscounted, and the yardmaster, a heavy old Tarsk named Brell, with hide like cracked slate and a ledger keeper's soul, fought a daily war against entropy with 4 overworked tally clerks. In her 9th week, Wren found a recurring 11-ton discrepancy between the intake manifest of a decommissioned grain hauler and the plate count coming off it, traced it to a subcontractor double billing through a transposed berth number, wrote it up in the precise, joyless format of an Earth survey fault report, and left it on the tally office counter because the queue was long and her shift was starting. Brell summoned her the next day. The Tarsk read her report again in front of her, slowly, with one blunt claw following the lines. "Who taught you to write a discrepancy?" he said. "My father." "What was he?" "A surveyor." "The record says he was a murderer." Brell looked at her for a long moment with eyes like wet stones. Bondyards are full of people with stories, and yardmasters survive by not hearing them. But a Tarsk reveres a clean ledger the way other species revere their dead, and what he had in his hand was a clean ledger. "Records say," he rumbled. At last. Records say what the hand that writes them says. The trick of it, little cutter, is that most things are written by more than one hand. He set the report down. "You're off the torches. You'll clerk for me. The pay is the same, which is nothing, but the air is better." It was in Brell's tally office that Wren got her education, and it was an education no academy on Earth could have sold her. She learned how the Accord actually breathed. Every hull that moved through every lane shed paper like a comet sheds ice, berth assignments, traffic control tapes, bunkerage receipts, mass declarations, customs attestations, maintenance invoices, crew rosters, quarantine stamps. Each document lived in its own archive under its own authority with its own retention rules. And this was the revelation that reorganized her life. Almost none of those authorities talked to each other. The Banner Table's grand record, the one that had condemned her family, was a thin skin stretched over 10,000 independent ledgers, and the skin could say anything it liked. The ledgers underneath only said what had happened. She began in her 2nd year to ask small questions of the paperwork that passed through Hollow Reach. The yard bought scrap from across the inward lanes. Scrap came with provenance documents. Provenance documents named ships, dates, ports. She was not looking for sand. She was teaching herself to look. She built, in the margins of her clerking, a private map of where logs lived. Which ports kept traffic tapes for 30 years and which wiped them in 5. Which bunkerage guilds sold their old receipts as waste fiber, which customs houses would certify a copy for anyone with a fee, and which demanded standing. She kept the map in her head and in a cheap slate coded in her family's old survey shorthand. And she told no one, not even Brell, though she suspected Brell knew she was sharpening something in the dark, the way he knew everything that happened in his yard. In her 3rd year on cask, 2 things happened in the same month, and together they set the course of everything after. The first was the visit of the Earth Consul's man. He came through the yard on a registry errand, a junior consular archivist with a young man's haircut growing out of regulation, cataloging condemned Earth nationals in mandate holdings, a thing Earth was permitted to do under the Accord's consular articles, and a thing Earth did, Wren would learn, with a thoroughness that no other signatory ever bothered to match. His name was T.O. Halloran. He sat across a steel table from her with a slate and called her by her struck name, Wren Calder, which no one had spoken aloud in 3 years, and the sound of it nearly broke her in half. "I have to advise you of your status," Halloran said, in the tone of a man required to read words he hated. "Your condemnation is recognized by Earth under treaty. Your consulate cannot appeal it, contest it, or relieve it." He paused. "I am also required to inform you that the case file concerning the incident at the Serene Shelf remains, designated a standing case by the Office of the Consul General. Standing case 19. It does not close." "What does that mean?" Wren said flat. Because hope was a luxury and she had thrown her luxuries overboard years ago, if it cannot appeal, contest, or relieve, it means, Halloran said, that Earth continues to collect and certify every document that touches the incident, against the day a venue exists to receive them. The case does not close. He met her eyes, and underneath the procedure there was something steady that she recognized, because she saw it in her own mirror. "Earth does not run out of patience, Miss Calder. It is the one thing we make more of every year. If you ever come into possession of documents, the consulate certifies copies free of charge." He left her a contact code printed on a card with no consulate marking, and he left her something she had not had since the contract hall, the knowledge that she was not the only hand on the wrench. The second thing that happened was the mandate audit. A mandate fiscal inspector came through Hollow Reach to audit the surety accounts, the ledgers that recorded, to the gram and the hour, how much of each condemned line's debt had been worked off. Wren, clerking the intake desk, processed his documentation, and in the inspector's own authenticating papers, in the routine list of his recent assignments, she read a name that stopped her breath. Breaklane Holdings, a Cassar registry shell, audited and cleared the previous quarter for the export of refined Kellor. The Serene Shelf was a Kellor formation. It was what the Spindrift had been surveying, the only thing worth surveying out there, a lode her father had described over the family table as the kind you find once in a working life. The claim had never been filed. The survey had died with the ship. The shelf, as far as the Accord registry knew, was barren rock, and yet here was a mandate shell moving refined Kellor to market 3 years later, and no new survey of record anywhere in the lane registries. She checked through the yard's own subscription that night, with her heart going like a cutting torch. Somebody had taken her family's find. Somebody who knew what the Spindrift had found before it died, which was a list of people exactly one name long. She sat back from the tally desk in the empty office, and the sodium light hummed, and the anger came up in her once, hard like water hammer in a cold pipe, and she let it pass all the way through and watched it go. Anger was loud. Loud was useless. The Accord had taught her its own lesson better than it knew. Nothing moved that machinery but the record. Very well. She would become a hand that writes the record. Not a fugitive, not a saboteur, not a girl with a grievance. Every one of those the machinery was built to crush. She would be the other thing, the thing the machinery was built to obey, a name in good standing, a rank with signature authority, a master whose ledgers were so clean that when she finally laid a document on the banner table, the table would have spent years training itself to believe her. It took her 4 more months of clerking and one conversation with Brell to find the door, because there was a door. The Accord, ravenous for lane crews after the Corward expansions, had cut a hatch into the wall of its own caste arithmetic, and the hatch was called Hazard Service. A condemned bondholder could enroll in the Lane Auxiliary, the Accord's Merchant Marine Reserve. For hazard work, no free crew wanted. Salvage tugs, fire watch, plague quarantine ferries. Auxiliary service paid surety debt at triple rate. It also, after a clean enrollment period, conferred something the recruiting notices did not advertise, and the mandate had never bothered to close, because no condemned soul had ever survived long enough to use it. Eligibility for a cleared working name under the Lane Charter's clean keel. Provision, a legal identity for service purposes, issued so that lane controllers would not have to process a condemned registry mark in every docking transaction. A cleared name, standing, narrow as a knife blade but standing. "The tugs kill more than they keep," Brell said, when she put the transfer request on his desk for endorsement. He said it the way a man notes weather. Then he signed and stamped and looked up at her from under the gray shelf of his brow. "I have run this yard 50 years. I have watched 10,000 of the condemned come through, and they break one of 2 ways. They stop believing the debt will ever end, or they stop believing it ever should. You are the third kind. I have seen 3 of you." He pushed the papers back across the desk. "A ledger is a ship that never sinks, little cutter. Go build yours." 11 days later, Wren Calder rode a cruise shuttle up from Cask to the salvage tug Aldgate, enrolled under hazard articles, debtor class, and the lane controller who logged her aboard never looked up. She was 22 years old. She had a slate full of shorthand, a contact code with no markings, a yard clerk's knowledge of where the galaxy kept its paper, and a piece of arithmetic she ran every night the way other people pray. Somewhere in the Mandate Fleet archive, sealed under fleet privilege, The Corvette Vossern's own gun log was sitting in the dark, time-stamped, checksummed incorruptible, saying 14 rounds fired, outbound first. Machines do not grieve and machines do not testify with sorrow. The log was there. The log was always there. She just had to become someone the law would let stand close enough to ask for it, in the one room where even a fleet warden could not say no. The tugs were everything Brell promised. The Aldgate worked the inward lane's worst traffic. Burned freighters, tumbling wrecks, reactor scrams, and hazard crews went in where automated systems balked. In her first year, Wren learned vacuum work, learned the particular silence after a hull pops, learned to sleep in a rescue ball clipped to a tether, and watched two crewmates die. One to a fuel line ghost pressure and one to plain bad luck, and the surety meter on her debt ran backward at triple rate, tick by tick, like a tide deciding to turn. It was the Castle Run that made her name on the lanes in her second year aboard, though that was never what she was doing there. The Castle Run was a Velik bulk freighter, 900 meters of grain and bad luck, that lost containment on a fuel cell 2 jumps short of Port Ember and called the lane with her cargo decks burning and her crew sealed into the forward third. The Aldgate was closest. Tugs do not argue with arithmetic. They went in while the lane authority was still clearing traffic, and Wren spent 11 hours in a hard suit on the freighter's skin, cutting access for the rescue balls, while the fire walked the cargo decks behind the bulkhead under her boots, and the hull groaned its long wail notes through her gloves. 19 Velik came out alive through her cuts. The 20th hatch opened on a compartment the fire had reached first, and she stood in it for the count of 3 breaths, made herself log what was there, because someone would have to attest it, and went back to work. That night, while the Aldgate's master filed the casualty report, she sat in the paint locker and wrote her own account of the hatch sequencing, time-stamped, cross-referenced to the suit logs, unasked. And when the Velik Lane inquiry convened 5 weeks later and the freighter's operator tried to argue the crew had died of the tug's slow response, the Aldgate's master laid Wren's reconstruction on the inquiry table, suit log by suit log, hatch by hatch, and the operator's counsel read 4 pages of it and withdrew the claim before the recess. The inquiry's presiding registrar, a Velik of great age and no patience, held the document up afterward like a specimen. Who clerked this? Debtor crew, the Aldgate's master said. Hazard articles. Human. Then your tug carries the best clerk on this lane in its paint locker, the registrar said, and the lane is run by fools. And the sentence went down the lanes the way sentences do, from wardroom to dockside, until insurers along 3 jumps of traffic had learned the Aldgate carried a debtor who wrote reconstructions that survived counsel, and the work began coming to her. Rec files, disputed manifests, provenance tangles, each one paid in the only coin she wanted: access, registry subscriptions, certified copies, standing relationships with the offices where the Galaxy kept its paper. The master called her in after the inquiry and looked at her for a while across his little steel desk, a scarred Hirik who had been broken off a banner cutter for the crime of being right too loudly. 19 out of 20, he said. On this lane, in that fire, with that response window, there's masters with 30 years would have lost the forward third entire. You know it. You haven't said it. You wrote a hatch log instead. He pushed her reconstruction back across the desk. I've shipped grief before. Grief drinks or breaks or gets the next crew killed proving something. You file. What in the void are you building, Hale? A clean record, master, said Wren in the wooden voice, and the Hirik studied her a moment longer with his cracked yellow eyes. And then, because hazard crews keep each other's lockers shut, nodded once and never asked again. But it was the Hirik who put her name forward for the coxswain's ticket that same quarter, and the Hirik who wrote in the endorsement, in blunt cutter deck prose she would not see for years. This one is owed something by somebody. Recommend the lane stay on her right side until she collects. She also learned the tug's secret, the one that made every following year possible. Salvage crews touch everything. A tug is the corner of the lanes. Every wreck comes wrapped in a file, its last traffic tape, its bunkerage records, its cargo attestations. Because the lane insurers demand provenance before they pay out, and somebody aboard the tug has to assemble that file, and nobody ever wants the job. Wren wanted the job. By her second year, she was the Aldgate's wreck clerk in all but title, the debtor girl who could conjure a vessel's whole paper life from 9 ports in 3 days, and insurers along the inward lanes began to know the work, the way Brell had known it, by its cleanness. By her third year, the tug's master, a scarred, laconic Hirik who had once been cashiered off a banner cutter for striking an officer who deserved it, put her name forward for the coxswain's ticket, and the lane auxiliary, which cared for exactly nothing except whether the lanes ran, granted it, and with the ticket, the provision, clean keel. In a registry office on a transfer station whose name she would always remember, Port Ember, gray and loud, smelling of coolant and fried dough, a lane auxiliary registrar with 4 arms, and no curiosity issued her a cleared working name. Lawful for all service, contract, and standing purposes under charter, and she walked out of the office as Wren Hale, coxswain, debtor class, surety attached but identity unmarked, and stood for a moment in the concourse traffic letting strangers stream past her, none of whom could see the struck name riding under the cleared one like a keel under a hull. That night she sent 2 words to Halloran's unmarked code, the first message she had ever risked. Standing now. The reply came back in 4 hours, and it was 1 word longer, and she read it perhaps 100 times over the years that followed, in bunks and watchrooms, and once by the light of a burning freighter, because it was the entire shape of what Earth was, and what Earth was prepared to do, and how long Earth was prepared to take to do it. Case 19 does not close. The first ledger cost her 11 weeks' pay, and she bought it as garbage. She had learned at Hollow Reach that the bunkerage guilds of the inward lanes kept fuel receipts for 9 years, and then sold them in bulk as waste. Fiber to reclamation brokers who pulped them for packaging. Receipts were boring. Receipts were the most boring documents in the galaxy, which is why nobody had ever bothered to seal them, and Port Ember's Guildhall, the same gray, loud station where Wren Hale had been born in a registry office, happened to be the bunkerage authority for the mandate picket lanes off the Serene sector. Wren put in for the waste lot auction under an auxiliary procurement code stated purpose, reclaimed fiber for tug fendering, which was even true. She won the lot because no one bid against garbage. It came to her in 11 sealed bales, and she went through them on her sleep shifts in the Aldgate's paint locker over a span of 4 months, receipt, by hand, until on a night she did not allow herself to treat as special. She lifted out a flimsy yellow sheet stamped with the bunkerage seal of Port Ember and the hull code of the Mandate Corvette Vassern, combat load propellant and magazine coolant full draw, dated 2 days before the Serene shelf. She sat with it a long time, the locker humming around her. A Corvette on routine picket runs cruise load. Combat draw meant the Vassern had fueled for a fight before there was any fight to fuel for. Before, by Sand's own sworn account, an unprovoked human attack that no one could have predicted. It was nothing, 1 sheet, deniable, explainable, a clerical curiosity. It was also the first object in the physical universe that agreed with her, and she had been alone with the arithmetic for 5 years. She photographed it under proper light, logged its provenance, auction lot, bail number, chain of custody in her own meticulous hand, and sent the package to the unmarked code. 20 days later, a consulate courier pouch reached her at a lane depot, and inside was a certified attestation, Earth Consular Seal, deposited to Standing Case 19, Exhibit 1, and a handwritten line from Halloran that was not procedure at all. 1-1. She pinned the word inside her sea chest where other crew pinned pictures of their families. She had no pictures of her family. The provosts had cataloged those as forfeit property too. The second ledger took 2 years because the second ledger had to be the position tapes, and position tapes were not garbage, they were infrastructure. Sand had sworn to the tribunal that his picket met the spindrift inside the marked lane at the Serene approach, that the humans had violated a mandate traffic corridor, which was what gave his Corvette standing to challenge them at all. Lane positions were logged by traffic relays, autonomous buoys strung through the dark like fence posts, and their tapes went to the Accord's lane authority and were sealed against tampering for exactly 30 years. Sealed against tampering, not sealed against reading, a distinction that existed because insurers needed rec positions, and that meant a certified read could be commissioned by any party to a salvage claim with a master's countersignature. Wren was not a master yet, so she got the tape the long way. She found the wreck. A Villic grain hauler had broken its back at the Serene approach 8 months after the spindrift died, a wholly unrelated misery, and its insurers had never closed the file because the lane authorities read had been commissioned too narrow, a 4-hour window around the casualty. The claim was still disputed. Disputed claims hire investigators. Investigators hire rec clerks. The Aldgate's reputation for paper was by then a small legend along the inward lanes, and when the insurer's adjuster came asking for the debtor clerk who reconstructed provenance like a surveyor, Wren named her price not in money but in scope, commissioned the lane authority read for the full traffic quarter, every transponder squawk in the Serene approach for 90 days, certified with copies to the assembling clerk for her working files. The adjuster, who cared about a grain hauler and nothing else in creation, shrugged and signed. The read came back as 400,000 lines of transponder data, and somewhere in the third 100,000, exactly where the calendar said it would be, was the day her family died. Wren ran the plot 3 times on 3 different slates before she let herself believe it. There was the spindrift, transponder honest as sunrise, Holding the survey grid she had flown 1,000 times in her head outside the mandate corridor, 40,000 kilometers outside it, in open registry space, where no mandate corvette had challenge rights over anything. And there was the Vassern, squawk dark, running with its transponder mask, which was itself a fleet violation, visible anyway, because the relay's passive track had painted its drive plume, burning in from deep field on an intercept solution it had begun computing 11 minutes before any human could have seen it coming. The lie was not bent truth. It was manufactured whole. Sand's Corvette had left the corridor, run dark and hunted. The certified red went into a courier pouch. 2. By then, year 6, her ticket upgraded, 4th officer's braid on a freight lane escort. She had stopped thinking of the work as evidence gathering. Evidence was a courtroom word, and no courtroom in the Accord would seat her. What she was building was older and simpler than a case. She was rebuilding the day itself, instrument by instrument, until it could speak with no human throat involved. And what frightened her, in the narrow hours, was never that she was wrong. The plot lines did not permit wrong. What frightened her was that she was right, and that it might not matter, that the banner table's thin skin of record could simply decline to look down. She filed the fear next to the anger, in the locker with everything else loud, and went back to work. Othric Sand in those same years rose like heat. She tracked him the way a navigator tracks weather, impersonally on public bands. The Serene incident had made him the warden who defended the lane and grieved his human friends even as he condemned them, a story the mandate told at Academy commencements. Squadron warden became flotilla warden. Flotilla warden became fleet warden, third-ranking line officer of the Kessler mandate, with a flagship called the Praxiat and a seat. This was the detail that made Wren set down her tea and walk twice around the crew mess, slowly, saying nothing, at the banner table itself, as the mandate's deputy delegate to the joint command of the Seven-Banner Accord. He gave a broadcast address that year on the anniversary of the Serene incident at a memorial the mandate had built to its 6 fallen, 6 crew of the Vassern who appeared on no casualty manifest she had ever been able to buy, borrow, or reconstruct because the human survey ship had never fired a shot, and she had the maintenance ledgers to prove no mandate hull in the sector took battle damage that quarter. Sand stood in gray dress armor under good lighting and spoke of the burden of vigilance and of forgiveness, and he said the name Calder out loud, with sorrow, the way a man lays flowers on a grave he dug himself. I knew that family, Sand told the cameras, and 12 jumps away a freight escort officer with a cleared name watched on a mess hall screen with her hands folded, learning him. I sailed with them. What happened at the Serene Shelf grieves me to this hour. But the law is the keel of the Accord. Without it, we are all of us adrift. The law is the keel. She wrote it in her slate in shorthand in the file where she kept his sworn statements. Already 400 entries deep, because Sand had now told the story of the Serene Shelf in 11 venues across 9 years. And he was a fleet officer to his bones, disciplined, consistent. And that consistency was a vault door swung shut on its own hinge pins. He had sworn to specifics, range 4,000. Inside the corridor, battery fire, 6 dead. Every specific was a hostage he had handed to the instruments, and he did not know the instruments were being collected. The third ledger was the guns, and the guns were almost where it ended. The Vassern had been refit at a mandate client yard at Tessevar 18 months after the incident. She had the movement orders from a scrap provenance bundle the same way she had first found Breakline Holdings. Refit invoices named work performed. If the Vassern's main battery had been relinned, the invoice would say so, and barrel relining after 14 rounds of full charge fire, when Sand's sworn account had his Corvette firing 7 defensive rounds, was the kind of arithmetic that turned a sorrowing warden into a liar in the eyes of any gunnery board in the Accord. The Tessevar yard, folded in year 8, drowned in mandate debt restructuring. Its records went to commercial auction in mixed lots, and Wren, by then second officer with a procurement signature of her own, bid on the gunnery archives through the auxiliaries training office. Historic, maintenance data for instructional use, a purpose so dull it was nearly invisible. Nearly. Another bidder ran her up through 6 rounds before dropping out, and 11 days after the lot reached her, a Mandate Fleet liaison officer appeared at the auxiliary depot on Port Imber with a records reconciliation request. The Mandate wished to confirm that no fleet privilege documents had strayed into commercial archives, and would the auxiliary kindly furnish an inventory of recent acquisitions. The request crossed Wren's own desk because the training office had routed the lot through her signature. She stood holding the flimsy for a full minute, hearing Brell's voice across the years. Most things are written by more than one hand. Then she did the only thing that was both safe and true. Her job, perfectly. She furnished the inventory, complete accurate, the gunnery archive listed in plain sight among 400 dull line items, because a hidden thing is a found thing, but a boring thing is invisible. She attached the lawful purchase records, the auction certifications, the training office purpose memo. She answered the liaison's follow-up queries in the auxiliary's most wooden administrative prose, and she watched the reconciliation request die the death of all paperwork that finds nothing exciting, formally closed, no further action, while the one invoice that mattered, Vossern main battery, full reline, 14-round wear profile certified by the yard's own gauges, was already certified into standing case 19, Exhibit 11, because she had pouched it to Halloran the day the lot arrived, before the liaison's boots ever touched the deck. 3, the courier slip said. Then, beneath it, in Halloran's hand, the consul general has begun reading the file herself. The fourth ledger she did not find. It found her, and it was the only time in 11 years that the work made her weep. A relay maintenance tender out of the Oaf Guild docked beside her convoy at a layover, and its purser, Oaf are scrupulous, it is their whole reputation, came looking for the famous auxiliary paper clerk with a problem of conscience. The guild serviced the Serene Approach relays. Relay buoys buffer everything they hear, and when their buffers are swapped during maintenance, the old cores are supposed to be wiped and recycled. A guild technician 9 years ago had pulled the cores from the Serene relays and found the wipe queue backlogged and had, in the immortal way of technicians everywhere, shelved them in a parts locker and forgotten them. The guild had found them in an inventory scrub. Guild law required disposal. Oaf scruple required asking, first, whether any party of record held an interest in the contents. And the lane gossip said that if anything in the Serene sector had a party of record, it was the quiet woman on the grain convoys who paid fair prices for old paper. The cores held overflow traffic from the day of the incident, including 9 seconds of tight beam transmission from the survey vessel Spindrift, captured as the relay relayed it, time-stamped, checksummed, the opening burst of a mineral claim filing, Calder survey, Serene shelf, Kellor load, coordinates, assay summary attached, cut off mid-packet at the moment the ship died, and under the data channel, because claim filings carried a voice attestation by accord law, ran her father's voice. This is Davin Calder, Master Spindrift, attesting survey true and claim lawful. 9 seconds, he sounded busy, he sounded like a man doing paperwork, which he was, with his youngest brother beside him and 4 good crew at stations and an unmarked Corvette already 11 minutes into its dark intercept burn, and the recording did not know what was coming, and that was the unbearable thing, the voice's plain workday innocence. Wren listened to it once all the way through in a rented sleeping pod with the privacy screen drawn, and then she put her hand over her mouth and sat without moving for the better part of an hour, while the grief she had packed in ice for a decade came up through every seam at once. Then she packed it again, because the recording was not a wound. It was a witness. It was the claim itself. Proof that the Spindrift was transmitting a registry filing, not charging a battery. Proof of what the load was worth and who found it first. Proof that the last act of her father's life had been an act of law. She bought the cores from the guild at the guild's own scrupulous valuation, with a receipt. Of course, with a receipt for, came the reply. And then, for the first time, a summons folded inside the courier slip, on consulate letterhead, from the Consul General of Earth to the Kessar Mandate herself. Consul Mariam Osi requests the attendance of Auxiliary Officer Wren Hale at her convenience on a matter of registry. Osi received her in a consulate office deliberately too small for ceremony, a compact woman in her 50s with gray at her temples and the stillness of someone who had spent 30 years saying less than she knew. On her desk was a single-bound folio stamped with the Earth Consular seal and a docket number, SC-19. Officer Hale, she said, and then quietly, with the door sealed and the room swept, Mrs. Calder, sit down. I want to show you what Earth has been doing with your 11 years. The folio was an index. Standing case 19 now ran to 2,106 certified exhibits. Her own, the bunkerage receipt, the lane read, the gunnery invoice, the relay cores, and the patient dozens of corroborating fragments she had pouched over the years, formed its spine, but Earth had been building flesh around that spine the whole time. Sworn statements from retired lane controllers, taken on Earth where the mandate had no reach. Metallurgical assays matching brake line holdings exported Kellor to the Serene Shelf's unique isotope signature, commissioned through third species brokers, the mandate's own published fleet citations, archived before they could be quietly revised. A forensic linguistics study of SAN's 11 public retellings, cataloging 41 specific sworn assertions, and the instrument records each one contradicted. Earth has no venue, Osi said. That has not changed. We cannot bring this to the banner table. She turned the folio to face Wren. But you are about to be able to. Your surety debt retires in 14 months at current rate. Your service record is, I am told, the cleanest in the inward auxiliary. When the debt clears, you are eligible to sit for your master's boards, and a lane auxiliary master of 8 years unblemished lading carries audit standing, the right to lay a documentary discrepancy before the joint. Command at the decennial reckoning. I know, Wren said. I've known for 9 years. The next reckoning is in 26 months. She looked up from the folio at the console of her species. I'll be a master of record for it by 11 weeks. For the first time in the interview, Miriam Osei smiled, and there was nothing diplomatic in it at all. Then let me tell you, she said, how Earth intends to spend those 26 months. What Earth intended, it turned out, was to do what Earth had been doing for 11 years, only now with the throttle open. Everything lawful, nothing loud. The reckoning, Osei explained, was the Accord's once-a-decade accounting, a full audit of the Joint Command, every signatory's fleets and ledgers laid before the banner table for review. It existed because the Accord's founders had trusted each other exactly as far as species who had all once been each other's targets could, and they had built into the founding charter a clause that even the great fleets had never managed to amend because every small signatory clung to it like a hull plate. Article 60, the audit article. During a reckoning, and only during a reckoning, any documentary discrepancy laid before the table by a party with audit standing must be answered from the primary record, not from testimony, from the instruments. And if the discrepancy touched fleet conduct, the table could order fleet archives unsealed. The Holy of Holies, the privileged cores where every warship's logs were vaulted under fleet honor by a simple majority of banners. It has been invoked against a fleet 4 times in 200 years, Osei said. It has succeeded once. The mandate will fight standing first, then scope. Then they will offer settlement, which is an admission worn as a courtesy, and which Earth will refuse, because a settlement seals the file. She folded her hands. Earth does not want damages, Miss Calder. One family was scattered to 9 labor holdings on the sworn word of a man whose own instruments call him a liar. Earth wants that sworn word played against those instruments in front of every banner of the Accord, in the same chamber where your family was condemned, on the same civil band that carried it live. Earth wants the record corrected in public, at scale, permanently. We are a young signatory. The old fleets believe our patience is short, our memory commercial, our reach thin. They have built their whole way of handling us on that belief. Something came into the consul's face then that was not diplomacy at all. They burned 6 of our people and filed it as our crime, and for 11 years Earth has answered with courtesy and copies. The reckoning is where they learn what the courtesy was for. There were, Osei said, 2 gaps left in the spine and 26 months to close them. The first was money. The instruments could prove Sand lied. Only the money could prove why. And motive was what would keep the mandate's own delegation from closing ranks around him when the logs played. Breakline Holdings had moved the Serene Kellor through 4 shells and a client world mint, and Earth's brokers had mapped the river but not the source, the one document tying the shell chain to a living hand. So Wren went back to the paper. It took 9 months. A salvage claim on a foreclosed Breakline lighter, bought by the auxiliary's own training office at her dull, invisible suggestion, and the lighter's purser logs never wiped because the foreclosure had been processed by a clerk on double shift. The logs held disbursement orders. The disbursement orders held an authenticating cipher, and the cipher, when Earth's forensic registrars finished with it, resolved to a mandate fleet credential issued in the year of the incident to the office of the Warden Commanding Picket Squadron 9 Serene Sector, his own office, his own cipher. He had not even fully trusted a deputy with it. Discipline, consistency, a vault door swung shut on its own hinge pins. The second gap was harder because the second gap was the 6. Sand's surety invocation, the legal engine that had condemned 38 Calders, rested on 6 dead mandate crew. The casualty rolls were fleet sealed, and Wren's years of reconstructed maintenance and movement records said no mandate hull in the sector had taken battle damage that quarter, but absence is an argument, not an exhibit. Somewhere there were 6 names that had been retired into a lie, 6 families on Kessler client worlds who had been told something, who received a pension or did not, who lit remembrance lamps for sons and daughters either genuinely dead of some other cause or the possibility. Wren circled at night, not dead at all, reassigned under seal, paid to be ghosts. It was Halloran who found the thread, because Halloran had spent 11 years becoming the Accord's quietest expert in the paperwork of the dead. Mandate fleet pensions were sealed. Mandate client world probate was not. 6 service estates had been probated in the Serene year, all 6 routed through the same fleet notary, all 6 filed under a casualty class used for deaths and maintenance accidents, not action. A pension clerk's code on 3 of them matched a clerk later disciplined, quietly, for irregular attestation, then re-employed within a year by a contractor whose registry resolved, 4 shells down to Breakline. 6 accident deaths, dressed as battle. San had not even needed to kill anyone of his own. He had borrowed his fleet's routine dead, relabeled their files, and built a massacre's worth of grievance out of a docking accident and 2 reactor scrams, and his 6 fallen of the Serene Shelf had a memorial with their names in gray stone, and somewhere 6 Client World families had been handed folded banners for the wrong lie. When the certified bundle went into the courier pouch, Halloran's slip came back with no number at all. It said only, "Spine complete, come sit your boards." She sat her master's boards at Port Imber, in the same gray station where her cleared name had been born, before an examining panel of 3 auxiliary masters who put her through lading law, hazard doctrine, lane protocol, and casualty procedure for 9 hours, and emerged looking like people who had tried to find the bottom of a well and failed. The surety meter on the Calder debt had run to 0 4 months earlier, 11 years 2 months, 16 days after the contract haul, and the Mandate's Holdings Office had issued its discharge attestation with the indifference of a machine, spitting a ticket which was, Wren had thought, exactly right. She had never wanted their remorse. She wanted their paperwork in order. Master of Record Wren Hale, Lane Auxiliary, 8 years unblemished lading. Audit standing under Article 60, ripening at the next decennial reckoning, 14 weeks out, at the banner table's seat on the great ring station that every species in the Accord, in every language, called some version of the span. It was in those last 14 weeks that Othric Sand walked back into her life in person, and she learned what her own pulse was made of. He came aboard her convoy at a fleet interchange as part of a Mandate ceremonial inspection. A fleet warden showing the flag through the auxiliary, services, trailing aids and cameras, pinning commendations to dock workers for the broadcast bands. The Mandate's deputy delegate to the banner table, reviewing the little people of the lanes. Her convoy's lading had been flagged for praise. Her name, her cleared name, was on the honors list, and there was no lawful way out of the receiving line that would not be a flag of its own. So Wren Calder stood on her own deck in Master's Braid and watched the man who had killed her father walk down the line toward her, older now, the gray hand heavier, the voice that had taught her star plotting warmer than ever, and she rehearsed her own stillness, the way she had once rehearsed depressurization drills. He took her hand in the Accord manner. He looked her in the face. She watched for it, the flicker, the catch, 11 years of dreading and wanting this exact second, and there was nothing, not a shadow of it. He saw a human auxiliary master with a clean record and a closed expression, one of 10,000 humans he had glanced past in a long career of glancing past humans. He had sat at her family's table 9 times. He had given her a brass plotting caliper for her 14th birthday. He did not know her, because Wren Calder was a name on a struck registry he had not thought about in years, a file he considered closed. "Exemplary lading, Master Hale," said Othric Sand, with the smile the cameras loved, the smile of a man whose record had been winning for 11 years. "The lanes are the Accord's blood, and people like you keep it clean. If only every officer of every banner kept such books." He pinned the commendation on her, the touch of it lighter than its weight would suggest. "The law is the keel, Master. People like you are why it holds." "The law keeps its own books, Warden," said Wren in the wooden administrative voice that 11 years had perfected. "I just try to match them." He laughed, genuinely pleased, a man complimented in his own currency, and moved down the line, and that night, alone, Wren sat with her hands flat on her desk and waited to discover what she felt. It was not rage, it was not grief, it arrived slowly, and it was recognition, cold and almost restful. He had told her the truth twice in 30 seconds without knowing it. The law was the keel. The books would hold. He had built his whole standing on the record, and the record was coming for him with her father's voice in its mouth, and there was nothing left in her that needed him to know her face before the chamber did. The want of it had burned off somewhere in the bales and the buffer cores, replaced by something with no pulse at all. Let him pin medals. The exhibits were certified. The boards were passed. The reckoning was 13 weeks out, and standing case 19 ran to 2,941 entries, and Earth patient, quiet, bookkeeping Earth, the youngest signatory, the species the old fleets had decided was safe to wrong, was done making copies. 9 weeks out, the Mandate moved first, and for 6 days Wren learned what it was to watch 11 years' balance on a clerk's filing habits. It was not suspicion of her. It was institutional hygiene. Every banner swept its own records before a reckoning the way a crew cleans ship, before an admiral's walk, and the Mandate's registry office, preparing its decade of fleet documentation for audit season, ran a routine completeness check on incident files of tribunal significance, and the Serene file came back flagged, not wrong, touched. Somewhere in the bowels of the Accord's interlocking archives, the completeness check had noticed what 11 years of quiet certified copying inevitably leaves access stamps. A lane authority read commissioned on the Serene Approach Quarter. A gunnery archive sold at commercial auction into auxiliary hands. Consular certification requests, dozens over a decade, all lawful, all individually boring, all now sitting in one flag summary on some mandate registrar's desk, describing, to anyone who chose to read it as a shape rather than a list, a slow, methodical, 11-year convergence on one day in one sector. Halloran's warning reached her at a lane depot in a routine consular circular with one comma out of place. Their oldest signal, agreed on a steel table on cask 9 years ago, meaning assume the file is being read, what saved it? And afterward, in the consulate annex, OC would say this was the week she stopped worrying about the vote, was that there was nothing defined that could be stopped. That had been the architecture of the whole 11 years, decided by a 19-year-old in a bondyard bunk who had watched a verdict get written before its trial. Everything lawful, everything stamped, everything already certified into Earth's sovereign custody where no mandate writ could reach. The mandate's registrars traced the lane read, commissioned by a Valic insurer, fully proper. The auction, public, documented, closed. The consular certifications, treaty protected, none of their business, and pointedly noted as such by Earth's registry liaison in language so courteous it could have been framed. 6 days of pulling threads, and every thread ended in a knot of perfect procedure, and on the 7th day the mandate's registry office did what institutions do with a shape that cannot be acted on, filed a memorandum. She got to read that memorandum, much later, after the unsealing made everything readable. It noted irregular long-term documentary interest in the Serene incident, sourced substantially to Earth consular activity, assessed the probability of an audit day discrepancy filing as moderate, and recommended, in the bland dialect of registrars everywhere, that the matter be brought to the attention of the warden then commanding as the officer of record. It had been. There was a receipt. Fleet Warden Othrixan had received the memorandum 9 weeks before the reckoning, read it. The access stamp said so, 11 minutes, longer than a glance, and marked it no action. She thought about those 11 minutes for a long time after. Whether it was arrogance, the war hero certain no bondyard arithmetic could climb to his altitude. Whether it was the gambler's paralysis, a man who knew exactly what was buried and could not start digging without admitting there was a grave. Or whether, and this was the reading she came to believe, knowing him, having been taught star plotting by him, it was simply that he checked his own position one last time and found it good. The logs were fleet sealed. The seals had held for 200 years. No master and no junior signatory could ever reach them. Never argue with a man about where his ship is, he had taught her, a girl with a brass caliper at her father's table. Check the log. He had checked the wrong one. He had checked the seal, and the seal was sound. He had never once audited the assumption underneath it that no one in the accord would ever be both patient enough to earn the rail and owed enough to stand at it, because that assumption was not written in any log he kept. It was written in hers. The span hung at the accord's gravitational center of politics like an axle in a wheel, a ring station 40 kilometers across, and Wren had never seen it before the morning her packet transport fell into its approach lanes in a river of 10,000 hulls. The decennial reckoning gathered the whole accord, every banner's fleet delegations, every signatory's consuls, every guild with a grievance and every registrar with a ledger, all of it funneling toward the table hall at the ring's first-built ark, where the founding articles were kept under crystal in the floor, and the 7 original banners hung overhead in a light deliberately tuned to the daylight of 7 different homeworlds. Earth's delegation birthed without ceremony. It was, the lane gossip noted, larger than anyone had expected, not in warships, of which there were none but in registrars. Consul General Osi had brought 41 of them, gray-suited, polite, carrying between them a certified documentary archive that had required its own cargo allotment, and the gossip bands made their jokes about humans and their paper, the accountant species, the filing cabinet fleet. The jokes had a nervous edge. Nobody brings 41 registrars to an audit because they are bored. Wren came aboard the span separately, as what she was. A lane auxiliary master of record attending her first reckoning, one of 900 such masters invisible. She drew a berth in the auxiliary barracks ring, logged her credentials with the table's registry, audit standing confirmed, enrollment stamped, and spent the first 3 days of the session doing exactly what every other master did, filing lading attestations, sitting guild sessions, being nobody. Procedure was armor. She had worn it so long it had grown into her. On the 4th day, the table took up fleet conduct review, banner by banner, and the Kesar Mandate's fleet report was presented by its deputy delegate, Fleet Warden Othrixan, in gray dress armor under the 7 banners, to general approval. Wren sat in the auxiliary gallery high above the floor and watched him accept the table's commendation for a decade of exemplary lane discipline. and she felt the armor of procedure settle over her shoulders one last time, cool and weightless. That evening in the consulate's secure annex, Miriam Osi laid the final order of operations on the table for the people in the room. Ren Halloran, the Consul General's counsel, and two registrars whose whole careers had been a folio called 19. Standing motions are heard on audit days, Ose said. The next is the day after tomorrow. Discrepancies are docketed blind. The table sees the filing party's credentials, not their biography. You will be a master's docket number until the moment the clerk reads the filing aloud. She looked at Ren steadily. Once it is read, there is no door out of that chamber, but through. The mandate will challenge your standing within the first minute. You know what the challenge will expose. You know what they will call you and what the band will broadcast, and that the table may rule against us on standing, and the file dies docketed, and the mandate learns everything we hold with the seals intact. You have carried this 11 years, and nobody, not Earth, not this office, not anyone, owns the right to make this choice but you. So I am required to ask you once, formally, and then never again. The Consul General of Earth folded her hands. Do you wish to file? Ren thought of the contract hall and the slates and the ramps. Lines green, sister. A model ship cataloged as forfeit property in a provost's sack. 9 seconds of a voice doing paperwork. 11 years of bails, buffers, invoices, probate, all of it lawful, all of it quiet, all of it converging on a docket clerk's reading voice in a chamber built like a verdict. I was 19, she said. When they read my name out on the civil band like a debt, they can hear me read theirs. She slid the filing folio across the table and signed the docket line in a hand that did not shake. Hail, Master of Record, file it. Audit day in the table hall began with the docket clerk, a silver carapaced andrel, whose reading voice had opened reckoning sessions for 60 years, and the docket clerk began, as the charter required, with the discrepancies of the smallest filers first. The founders had written that order into Article 60 on purpose. The great fleets audited each other all decade long. The reckoning's audit day existed for everyone else, and so the clerk read the master's filings before the guilds, and the guilds before the consulates, and this chamber traditionally used the master's hour to arrive late and talk quietly among its delegations. The 7 banners hung in their 7 daylights. The civil band carried the feed live, as it carried every reckoning, to every registry office and crew mess and bondyard in the Accord. Docket 41, read the clerk. Documentary discrepancy. Filing party hail. Master of Record, Lane Auxiliary, audit standing confirmed. Subject, fleet conduct, Kessler mandate matter. The engagement of record at the Serene Shelf, 11 years past. Styled in the joint record as the defense of Picket Squadron 9 against the armed human survey vessel Spindrift. The chamber's quiet talk did not stop all at once. It stopped the way pressure drops through a cracked seal. A delegation at a time, heads turning, slates lighting, until the only sound under the banners was the clerk's voice reading the particulars. That the filing party laid before the table-certified instrument records in contradiction of the engagement of record on 4 material points. That the filing party petitioned the table, per Article 60, to answer said discrepancy from the primary record, and that the primary record so required included the sealed fleet archive of the corvette Vossern and the flag records of the warden then commanding Picket Squadron 9. The warden then commanding sat 11 seats from the table's center in gray dress armor, as deputy delegate of the Kessler mandate. Ren, at the filer's rail far below the galleries with the folio on the stand before her, did not look up at him. She looked at the clerk, and she kept her breathing on the count she used in vacuum work, and she heard, in the new silence, the sound she had crossed 11 years to hear. The Accord's own machinery turning over, beginning slowly, because she had built it slowly, to look down. The mandate's senior delegate was on his feet before the clerk finished the 4th particular. He was old, copper-skinned, magnificent, and he did exactly what Osi had said he would do, in almost the words she had predicted. The mandate honors Article 60, he said, which was the required liturgy, and reminds the table that audit standing is a standing of persons. Before any fleet seal in this accord is touched on a master's petition, the mandate exercises its right of challenge. Who is the filing party? What is her line, her registry, her history? The table audits records. Let it begin with hers. It was meant to take a day, a referral to the credentials office, a procedural smothering, the file dying politely in committee while the mandate learned what it faced. The presiding officer of the reckoning, a vast and ancient sessile whose species chaired audits precisely because it found all other species equally tiresome, turned its sensory fronds toward the filer's rail. The challenge is lawful, it said. The filing party may answer it now, or surrender the docket to referral. I'll answer it now, said Ren. She had thought for 11 years about what this would feel like, and had concluded it would feel like jumping from a hold compartment with a thin tether. It did not. It felt like docking. Lines green. My working name is Wren Hale, issued lawful under the clean keel provision of the lane charter which this table wrote. Her voice went out over the chamber's address system and the civil band with it, level, unhurried, a clerk's voice, a surveyor's voice. My service is 8 years unblemished lading, the record is before you, and my standing was stamped by your own registry on enrollment. That is the answer the charter requires. She paused, one breath. Here is the answer the mandate is actually asking for. I was born Wren Calder, eldest surviving child of Davin Calder, master of the survey vessel Spindrift. I am the daughter of the man this table's record calls a murderer. 11 years ago, in this chamber on the testimony you are about to hear contradicted by its author's own instruments, my line of 38 was struck and scattered to 9 labor holdings, and I worked the mandate's surety debt to 0, and I earned this rank inside this accord's own auxiliary under this accord's own law, and I stand at this rail with this accord's own stamp on my standing. The mandate asks for my history. That is my history. Challenge my documents, if it can. The chamber did not erupt. The chamber did something worse. From the mandate's point of view, it leaned in. 400 delegations, every registrar and consul and fleet officer in the accord's first room, leaned toward the rail in a single rustling movement, and 10,000 slates lit at once as the civil band's feed went out to every deck and dock and holding in 7 fleet space, carrying the sentence the band's own archive would replay for years. I am the daughter of the man this table's record calls a murderer. In the Kessler delegation, 11 seats from center, Othric San had gone very still, and Wren watched him understand. She allowed herself that. She watched the name Calder land in him, watched him take her face out of the receiving line and the commendation and the wooden voice exemplary. Lading Master Hale, and set it beside a kitchen table 11 years gone and a girl with a brass caliper, and she watched the warden's gray composure hold perfectly while everything behind it began, for the first time in 11 years, to compute its own position honestly. The mandate's senior delegate was still standing. He was a professional. He found the next wall to fight from in under 3 seconds. The table's sympathy will be considerable, he said, and the mandate shares it. But the charter is not moved by biography. The filing party has confessed the defect herself. She is of a condemned line. A condemned line has no standing before this table. That condemnation is itself a holding of this body, and no master's stamp launders it. The docket is void on its face. The mandate moves referral and dismissal. And if the condemnation that voids her standing rests on the very record her filing peaches, said a new voice, then the mandate moves that this table use a lie to silence the audit of the lie. Consul General Mariam Ozzy of Earth had risen from the consular benches, gray-suited, unhurried, flanked by 2 registrars carrying between them a folio the size of a hatch cover. The chair recognizes the Consul General of Earth, said the Cecil, who appears to have been expecting this docket. Earth expects all dockets, Ozzy said, without expression, and the gallery, there is no chamber so old it has no gallery, laughed once nervously and settled. Presiding officer, Earth will not burden the table with sympathy. Earth is here to do arithmetic. Article 60, paragraph 9. A signatory consulate may adopt as its own any documentary discrepancy lawfully docketed by a master of its flag, whereupon the filing proceeds on the signatory standing, which this chamber cannot challenge. The master before you sails under Earth registry. Earth adopts docket 41. She let the folio fall open on the bench with a thump the address system carried to the rafters, and in adopting it, Earth supplements it. The table is advised that the Consulate of Earth has maintained the matter of the Serene Shelf as a standing case for 11 years. Earth tenders standing case 19, 2,941 certified exhibits, instrument sourced, provenance unbroken, indexed against 41 specific sworn assertions made before this body's tribunal by the warden then commanding. Earth asks nothing exceptional. Earth asks the table to do what the founders built this day to do. She turned for the first time toward the Kessler benches. Answer the discrepancy from the primary record. Unseal the archives. The mandate fought for 6 hours, and the fight itself became the indictment. They fought scope. The table should review the exhibits in committee first, and the Velic delegation, dry as ever, observed that Article 60 said from the primary record, not from committee, and the Vlic had helped write it. They fought precedent. Fleet honor had vaulted warship logs since the founding, and the smallest banners, the client species, and the single system signatories, the whole long tail of the accord that lived and died by the audit article's protection, began one by one to signal against them, because every small banner in that chamber had a serene shelf somewhere in its past, a condemnation it had swallowed because the record was closed, and they had just watched a debtor girl from a bondyard stand at the rail and crack the seal on hers with lading paper. They fought time. Refer it to the next session, and the Andral clerk, unbidden, with the silver serenity of 60 years procedure, read aloud the Charter's definition of the reckoning as the venue of record for the decade, which meant deferral was denial, which meant a vote. And at the 5th hour, the fight lost its last respectable cover, because the Velic adjudicator stood up. It was the same Velic. Everyone in the chamber knew it was the same Velic. The band had been running the old tribunal footage all day. The dry paper voice reading 38 names off a screen, and when it rose from the tribunal delegation's benches, stooped now, leaning on a glass cane, the hall went quiet out of something older than procedure. It had presided over 400 matters in a long judicial life. It had never once spoken at a reckoning. I certified the engagement of record, the Velic said, no preamble. Its species did not believe in them. I accepted sworn testimony from an officer of good standing, as the rules of my tribunal instructed me to do, and on that testimony I struck a line of 38 persons, of whom I remember most particularly the names of the children, because I read them aloud at speed so as to be finished sooner. The cane tapped once on the crystal floor over the founding articles. I have heard it argued today that the seals on fleet archives protect the honor of fleets. I wish to inform the table, from some experience, what else they protect. They protect judges from ever learning what their verdicts were made of. For 11 years I believed I had done a hard thing correctly. I am told the filing party stood in my chamber, in the gallery, the day I did it. For the first time, the papery voice turned, and the old adjudicator looked down the floor at the rail, at Wren, and inclined its head with terrible formality. If the instruments confirm her documents, then I was not a tribunal. I was a stamp. I should like to know which before I die. The Velic banner will vote to unseal. It sat. The mandate's senior delegate did not rise to answer. Because there are arguments procedure can survive and arguments it cannot, and a judge asking publicly whether it had ever been a judge was the second kind. At the 6th hour, the mandate offered settlement. Full restitution to the Calder line, restoration of registry, an honor payment of a scale that made the chamber murmur, contingent on the dockets, withdrawal and the sealing of the file. It was, as O.C. had promised, an admission warrant as a courtesy, and the offer was addressed with deliberate courtliness, not to Earth but to the filing party, because everything the mandate knew about humans said that 11 years of bond, labor takes a price, and everything it knew about commerce said everyone has one. The presiding officer's fronds turned to the rail. The filing party may answer. My family's registry, Wren said, is not the mandate to sell back to me. It is this table's to restore, after it reads what it signed 11 years ago against what its instruments wrote. I declined the courtesy. Call the vote. The Cecil called it, banner by banner, in founding order, on the motion that the fleet archives of the corvette Vossern and the flag records of the warden then commanding be unsealed and read into the audit of docket 41. The banner table of the 7-banner accord voted, while the civil band carried each banner's answer to every holding where a scattered family might be watching a mess hall screen, and Wren stood at the rail with her hands flat on the folio and counted, as she had once counted 41 seconds of testimony. 5 banners to 2. The seals came off the next morning. The accord did it the way the accord did everything that mattered, with custody and witnesses. The Vossern's archive cores had been vaulted at the mandate's fleet registry on the span itself. The founders had required every banner to vault its fleet records within the table's reach, a clause the great fleets had honored for 2 centuries precisely because no one ever expected it to be used. And the cores came into the table hall under a 4-banner escort, in a crystal transit case, and were mated to the chamber's reading frame by the Andral clerk's own hands, while the address system carried the click of every connector. The reading frame was older than the banners hanging over it. It existed to do one thing: render a fleet core's contents exactly, without summary, without advocacy, in the chamber's common cant at the pace of the record itself. The table will have order, said the presiding officer. The instrument will speak. The instrument is not cross-examined. Begin with the deck log of the corvette Vossern, from the hour the vessel departed its assigned corridor. What a warship's log sounds like, read flat into a silent chamber, is weather, position, attitude, drive state, watch changes. The chamber listened to the Vossern leave its picket corridor on no logged order, listened to its transponder go to mask, fleet violation, the gunnery delegates of 3 banners noting it aloud for the record in the same breath, listened to it run dark and inward for 11 minutes on. An intercept solution its own helm log labeled, in the dry grammar of machines, target, registry transponder spindrift, closure optimal target. The word went through the chamber like cold air through a cracked hatch. Survey ships are not targets. The Velic adjudicator, who had presided 11 years ago, older now, papery voice gone thinner, sat in the tribunal delegation with its slate dark, listening to the log of an engagement it had certified, hearing the word target stamped on an unarmed human hull 2 full minutes before. By the sworn account it had accepted, any human provocation could have occurred. Then the fire control log, and the chamber stopped breathing. Main battery, charged on closure, 11 minutes into the dark run, charged before contact, before challenge, before any conceivable human shot. 14 rounds, full charge, outbound timestamps in a tight professional rhythm, and inbound fire received none. The frame read it twice, because the mandate's own counsel, gray-faced, asked for it twice, hunting for a mercy that was not in the core. Inbound fire received none. Hull stress, battle damage, casualty interlocks, none. The 6 fallen of the Serene Shelf, the 6 deaths that had lawfully condemned 38 Calders, had left no mark whatsoever on the ship they had supposedly died defending, because no one had died aboard the Vossern that day, because nothing had touched her, because the only ship that died at the Serene Shelf was the one filing a mineral claim when the 14 rounds arrived. Earth registrars rose then, on the presiding officer's nod, and read the probate bundle into the record. 6 estates, 6 maintenance accident classifications, 6 families on client worlds folded into a borrowed massacre, and somewhere in the galleries a Kessar, fleet officer, some captain who had stood honor watch at the Greystone Memorial with the 6 names on it, made a sound that the address system caught, brief and raw, before discipline closed over it. The mandate's benches had gone the color of old ash. They had walked in defending a war hero. They were sitting in front of 7 banners and the live civil band, inside the audit of a thing none of their own delegation had known, and every officer among them understood in their bones what the logs meant, because the logs were fleet logs, their own sacred form, incorruptible by their own doctrine. The instrument is not cross-examined. They had vaulted their honor in those cores for 200 years. The cores had kept it, and now the cores were spending it. "The frame will read," said the Andral clerk. The flag voice record of the warden then commanding Picket Squadron 9 for the hour of the engagement. Sans counsel was on his feet, with the last wall left. "Flag voice records are command privileged. We're sealed," said the presiding officer, "and are unsealed." The motion carried 5 banners to 2. The frame will read. 11 years, 2,941 exhibits. A yellow bunkerage flimsy out of a waste bale. A lane read bought with a grain hauler's misery. A gunnery invoice wrapped in a training memo. 9 seconds of overflow in a forgotten buffer. Probate dust, a cipher 4 shells deep. All of it, every certified gram of it, had been assembled for exactly this, to force one door so the chamber could hear one voice. Wren stood at the rail and the frame began to read, and the voice that came out of it was the voice that had taught her star plotting, 11 years younger, crisp with command, perfectly calm. "Helm, hold the dark run. Guns, I want the battery charged at the turn." A pause. The frame rendered pauses. "It's a survey keel, mister. It files paper. It doesn't fight." The moment its claim burst starts transmitting, you put the full rack through its core compartment before the packet completes. The claim must not post. "Confirm," a junior voice. "Mandate gunnery can't." Confirming. Then the flag voice again, unhurried, a man doing arithmetic he had already accepted. "After action. It fired on a mandate picket, and we answered. 6 of ours in the line of fire. Registry will dress the rolls. Brake line handles the rest. The family runs 4 keels and a registry mark. Surety takes care of the family." Another pause, and then, in the tone of a man closing a ledger, the sentence the civil band would carry to every deck and dock, and holding in the accord, the sentence that would be quoted in every history of the reckoning written in any language of 7 fleets. "Sans law, mister. A closed record beats a clean conscience. Execute." The frame stopped. The chamber hung in a silence with a texture to it, a pressure, the silence of 400 delegations, each privately revising everything the last 11 years had been built on, and into that silence the reading frame, neutral as weather, appended the last item in its queue, the relay overflow. Earth Exhibit 2906, 9 seconds of tight beam captured at the moment of the 14 rounds. "This is Davin Calder, master of Spindrift, attesting survey true and claim lawful." The cut at the end of the 9th second was not dramatic. It was just an end, a packet that never completed, a sentence that would hang unfinished in the Accord's permanent record forever between a fire order and its execution. And Wren Calder stood at the filler's rail with her hands flat on the folio, in front of the banners and the band and the man 11 seats from center, dry-eyed, upright, and let the whole Accord listen to her father almost finish. The presiding officer's fronds were motionless for a long moment. "The discrepancy," it said at last, "is answered from the primary record. The record answers against the engagement of record on every material point. The table will hear the warden then commanding, if he wishes to be heard." Othrix San rose. The chamber watched him do it. The band's cameras held him, gray dress armor under 7 daylights, the most decorated line officer of his generation, and Ren watched too, and saw what no one else in the chamber could have seen, because no one else had sat at his knee learning declination. He came to his feet the way he had always come to his feet, deliberate, balanced, a man for whom posture was doctrine, and there was nothing left inside the posture at all. The record had been his keel. He had said so for 11 years in 11 venues, with sorrow. And the record had just turned under him, all of it, every instrument of the fleet he had given his life to, every log his own discipline had kept immaculate, and a man cannot fight his own keel. There was no version of EarthStrikesBack that could. The mandate's instruments are accurate, he said. Even now, the voice was steady. The chamber would talk about that for years, with more horror than admiration. They have always been accurate. I relied on that in this chamber, 11 years ago, on the certainty that no one of standing would ever ask them. He looked down the long floor at the filer's rail, and for the first and last time in 11 years in public, before the banners and the band, the warden and the bondyard girl looked at each other in full knowledge. I taught her trade to half that family's children, he said, to no one, to the chamber, to the corps. I should have remembered what surveyors do. They check the record against the ground. He set his command sigil on the bench rail in front of him, the gesture a Kessler officer makes only once. The mandate is owed my silence for whatever follows. The table has the record. It does not need me. He sat. He did not look away from her, and she did not look away from him. And what passed down the length of the table hall between them was not forgiveness and was not triumph. It was the settling of an account, formal, complete, witnessed, the way her people closed a ledger and his people struck a banner. Then the Kessler first warden, the mandate's senior fleet officer, who had sat through 6 hours of challenge and a morning of logs with the stillness of a mountain deciding, rose from the heart of the ash-colored delegation, and the whole chamber turned, because whatever the Accord did next, the mandate would do something first, and what a fleet does when its own corps convict its own legend is the truest audit there is. The first warden was named Vakas Orun, and she had commanded the mandate's fleets for 30 years on a doctrine she had written herself, and the first sentence of that doctrine was the one every Kessler cadet learned before they learned to seal a suit. The log outranks the officer. The mandate does not dispute its own corps, she said. The voice filled the hall without effort. It had been filling fleets for 3 decades. The mandate cannot. If we dispute the instruments today, no banner believes our instruments tomorrow, and a fleet whose word is disbelieved is not a fleet, is an expense. She turned slowly to face the 11 seats between her and the man in gray dress armor. EarthStrikesBack. By the reading of your own flag record before the assembled banners, you left your corridor under no order, masked your transponder in violation of fleet law, destroyed an unarmed vessel of a signatory species to suppress a lawful claim, falsified casualty rolls, suborned the registry of the dead, perjured yourself before the Accord's tribunal, and spent the proceeds through instruments of your own office. The mandate does not wait for this table to act on its officers. Fleet Honor Court is convened. It is convened now here in the sight of the banners, because the lie was told in the sight of the banners. It took 11 minutes. Kessler honor procedure was old and terrible and built for exactly this, and the chamber watched all of it, and the civil band carried all of it. Because Orun had ordered the cameras kept live with the cold deliberateness of a commander cauterizing a wound in the open where the whole crew can see the iron. 3 fleet judges empaneled from the delegation. The charges read from the corps themselves, the clerk's frame serving as accuser. No defense offered. He had given his silence and kept it. He stood through the whole of it the way he stood through everything, perfectly. And Ren, watching, understood that the posture was no longer doctrine. It was all he had kept. They did not touch him. That was the thing no human watching ever forgot. There was no force in it anywhere, only procedure, only the mandate's own grammar of unmaking. The senior judge read the finding. Proven on the record, all counts. Orun herself walked the 11 seats and stood before him, and San unsealed his own gray cuirass with steady hands, rank cords, fleet sigils, the decorations of 30 years, the serene commendation last, and laid each piece on the bench rail in front of him, one by one, in the sight of 7 banners, while the band's cameras held and the chamber stood in witness silence, and somewhere in 9 labor holdings, on mess hall screens, the scattered remnant of a struck human line, watched the man who had scattered them be peeled out of his own name by his own fleet, lawfully, in public, without one voice raised. The mandate strikes your rank, Orun said, when the rail held everything he had been. The mandate strikes your honors. The mandate strikes your name from its rolls, and enters in its place the finding of this court, so that where you were recorded, the record itself now stands. She paused, and the old doctrine writer in her chose the next words with visible, deliberate care, and aimed them not at him but at the hall. You said it truly once in this chamber. The law is the keel. You believed you were the law. You were cargo, like the rest of us. Only the record is the keel. And then the mandate, being the mandate, reached for its oldest tool to finish the repair, and the day turned one last time. The findings established blood proceeds and a stained line, the senior fleet judge recited, the formula as automatic as a checklist. Kessler law binds the offending line to the damage of its blood. The court will name the sand registry for surety. No, Wren did not decide to say it. 11 years of discipline, and the word was out of her before procedure could catch it, flat and hard, and it went out over the address system and stopped the formula mid-clause. And 400 delegations turned to the filer's rail to look at the human woman who had just said no to a fleet honor court with a single syllable. She gripped the rail and steadied and found the cold voice again. But she did not soften the word. Presiding officer. The filing party asked leave to be heard on remedy as the party of record injured. The Cecil's fronds inclined, the chamber leaned in again. The court is about to do to the sand registry what was done to mine. There is a granddaughter in that line who plots stars. There is a brother who builds keels at Tessavar and has never sailed within 9 jumps of the serene shelf. I have spent 11 years learning precisely how many hands it takes to scatter 38 people who did nothing. Her voice did not rise. The chamber bent toward it anyway, and the number of hands it took was every hand that followed procedure. Surety is not justice. Surety is arithmetic wearing justice's coat. It is the law that let one liar feed my whole line into the holdings on the strength of 6 invented dead, and if it eats his line today with the banners watching and the band live, then this chamber will have learned nothing except whose turn it is. She turned from the court to the table itself, to the 7 daylights and the crystal floor with the founding articles under it. Earth's filing asked you to answer a discrepancy from the primary record. The primary record now shows you what surety law is for. It is for making lies efficient. The man is accounted for, his own fleet has done it, on his own logs, and I would not subtract 1 line of that finding. But the law that broke my family is still on your books, loaded, waiting for the next sworn voice with sorrow in it. Strike this man's line into the holdings and you keep the gun. Strike the law. She laid her hand flat on the folio. On 11 years, and the serene shelf will have bought something. Silence. And then Miriam Osi was on her feet, and Earth, junior signatory, observer in matters of fleet discipline, the accountant species, moved formally under the audit article's remedy clause that kin surety be struck from the recognized law of the accord and barred as a basis of condemnation before the banner table, now and retroactively, with every existing surety condemnation referred for review on the primary record. The old fleets understood, in that moment, what Earth had actually been building for 11 years. Not a rescue, not a revenge, but precedent. And the strange thing, the thing the histories would chew on for a century, was that the second voice raised in support was Vekas Oren's. The mandate second, she said, into the chamber's astonishment, with her legend's stripped cords still lying on the bench rail 11 seats away. We have just learned at full price what our own law is worth as evidence. The log outranks the officer. The record outranks the law that fears it. Call the vote. 6 banners to 1, and the founder's crystal floor got 1 article heavier. And Wren Calder stood at the rail while the banner table of the 7-banner accord struck kin surety from its books in front of the live band, vacated the condemnation of the Calder line on the primary record, ordered the registry restored in full with its contracts and seniority, decreed restitution against the mandate at treble assessment with the break line proceeds traced and attached, and referred by name for review on the instruments, 811 other surety condemnations standing on its rolls, some of them a century old, each one of them somebody's contract hall, somebody's ramp, somebody's slate. Othric San went to the holdings, not as surety as himself, alone, his own sentence on his own finding, entered in the rolls of a mandate bondyard under the only designation he had left, the court's docket number. The band did not follow him there. Wren did not either. She had wondered, for 11 years, whether she would need to see it, and discovered in the event that she did not. The record had him now, all the way down, and the record never blinks and never sleeps, and there was nothing her eyes could add to its custody. She saw him once more, at the chamber doors under escort, in plain gray with the docket number at his collar where the fleet sigil had been. The escort halted by chance, or by some provost's quiet-eyed idea of mercy or of cruelty, an arm's length from where she stood with the folio under her arm, and for a moment the two of them were alone inside the noise of the emptying hall. "You could have come to me," San said. There was no performance left in the voice, and no sorrow either. Sorrow had been his working dialect, and the court had struck it with the rest. What remained was only an old man doing the last arithmetic, 19 years old, alone, condemned, any year of the 11. "I would not have seen you coming either way. But you never once tried the door." "You taught me why," Wren said. He waited. You taught me star plotting at my father's table, she said. You said never argue with a man about where his ship is. Check the log. The log doesn't love him. She shifted the folio under her arm, lines green, and looked at him the way her sister had once looked at a provost, like a bad weld, fixed now properly by someone who knew how. I never came to you because there was nothing at the door worth having. You'd have given me sorrow. I wanted the log. The escort moved. He went where the record sent him. She stood in the emptying table hall a moment longer, under the 7 daylights, and let the 11 years come to rest. The accord around her was already changing pitch. 811 dockets waking up, registrars of 6 species besieging Earth's consulate annex to learn the method, the civil band replaying a 9-second voice attesting survey true and claim lawful. But all of that was tomorrow's lading. Tonight there were writs to serve. 38 names, 9 holdings, 11 years. Earth had kept the list current the whole time. They went out within the week, and they went out the way everything in this war had gone. On paper, with seals irresistible. No fleet. No boarding parties. Earth chartered 6 unarmed consular packets, white hulls, registry markings, nothing aboard but registrars, medics, and writs of release executed under the table's own decree, and sent them down 9 lanes to 9 holdings with the band's cameras invited aboard, because OC understood, with the same cold clarity that had governed everything, that the Accord needed to watch this part too. The condemnation had been broadcast. The restoration would be broadcast. The record corrects in public, at scale, permanently, or it does not correct at all. Wren rode the first packet and Halloran rode with her, 11 years grayer at the temples and still carrying the same unmarked patience. And on the 4-jump passage to the ore-sorting station that had swallowed her mother, she finally asked him the question she had never permitted. Herself in a courier pouch. The list. You said Earth kept it current. How current? Halloran called up the file without a word and turned the slate to face her, and Wren read it and had to look out the viewport for a while. 38 names. Against each one, holding transfers, work assignment, health flags where consular visits had been allowed, last confirmed sighting, next scheduled visit, 11 years of quarterly entries maintained by a junior archivist who had visited a bondyard on cask once on a registry, errand, and then spent his entire career making sure that no Calder anywhere, in any holding, ever went 4 months without some clerk of Earth laying eyes on them and writing it down. Standing Case 19 had 2 parts, Halloran said quietly. The exhibits were the second. Not all of the entries were current. Some had stopped. Her grandmother Edda's stopped in the 6th year. The fiber mill, 11 jumps out, a mandate client world with thin consular access. Pneumonia? The winter, the mill's heating allotment was cut. The consulate had filed a protest over the heating allotment. The protest was on file. The protest had been thanked for its submission. Edda Calder, who had taught half the family to splice cable and the other half to play cards without mercy, had a grave with a registry number on a world none of her blood had ever walked. And Wren learned it from a slate in a packet's wardroom, 4 days too late to have spent 11 years knowing it. 6 others had stopped. The aunt who had married out of the trade, a holding transport accident in the 3rd year, 4 of her cousins aboard the same hull. An uncle's heart in the 9th year in a machine shop the consular notes called clean and decently run as holdings went, which Wren read as the kindest sentence anyone had managed to write about any of it. 38 had gone down the ramps. 31 were coming home. The packet docked at the ore station on a gray watch morning, and the holdings master, confronted by a table decree, an earth writ, 2 registrars, and a camera, produced the persons named with the speed of a man who had read the band feeds from the span and wanted his own ledgers looked at as little as possible. And in a mess hall that smelled of rock dust and recycled air between one shift bell and the next, Wren Calder watched her mother walk through a hatchway, looking for whatever consular clerk had come this time. Isa Calder was 56. The holdings had taken some of her and left the rest. The hands were harder, the hair was iron, the eyes were the same eyes that had audited every contract the family ever signed. She saw her daughter in master's braid and stopped as if she had hit a tether's end, and for a long moment neither of them managed anything at all, because some accounts cannot be read aloud, only signed, and then her mother said, in a voice that came out perfectly level and ruined everything by being level, I watched the feed from the span. They let us watch, this once. I told the whole sorting floor. I taught that girl to index. And Wren crossed the mess hall and held her mother while 11 years of quarterly. Entries became a person again, breathing, present, real, and the camera for once had the decency to look away. Tam they found at the 4th holding, and Tam found them first. He was 25 now, broad as a hatch frame, foreman of a hull-breaking crew on a yard moon Wren had never heard of. The holdings had spent 11 years teaching the boy who once stood very straight on a ramp to cut steel and he had spent them learning everything else the way Calders learned, quietly in the margins in other people's paperwork. When the RIT team came through the gate, he was waiting at the head of his whole crew with his transfer documents already in order, every line of them immaculate because of course he had heard the feed, and of course he had spent the days since preparing the lading of his own life, like a man who refused to come home with a single discrepancy for his sister to find. "Line's green, sister," said Tam Calder at the gate, holding up the folder, and grinned the grin that had gone down a ramp 11 years ago, and that was the moment, not the chamber, not the vote, not the logs, when Wren finally cried where people could see it and found she did not mind. Bren was last, because Bren was hardest to find. The little sister had been 9 when the provost allocated her, and children drew different lots. A creche school holding on a mandate client world, where condemned minors were raised to useful trades, and their registry marks were administratively simplified, a phrase Wren read in the consular file with her jaw set when records moved between offices. Twice in 11 years, the consulate's trace had thinned to a single thread. Twice Halloran's quarterly grind had recovered it. The thread ended at a fabrication yard on a cold little world at the lane's end in a certified welder, 20 years old, employee in good standing, free, technically her simplified record having shed its surety flag in year 8 through someone's clerical. Indifference, free and unaware of it, with no registry, no line, no name but a work designation, because the system that stole her had eventually just forgotten what it had stolen. Wren came to the fabrication yard's viewing gallery and looked down through the glass at the floor and knew her at once, and would have known her in a crowd of 10,000. A young woman at a seam jig, hood up, running a bead with exactly their father's stance, the slight forward patience of it, the refusal to hurry good work. The yardmaster called the designation over the floor address. The welder killed her torch, racked it properly, flipped up the hood, and came up the gallery stairs wiping her hands. A stranger with a stranger's guarded face, and stopped dead at the top of them, not at Wren's face. 11 years remake a face. At the thing Wren was holding. She had carried it from the span in her surcy chest, wrapped in a uniform shirt. A printed model of a survey ship, 4-keeled, gray and blue, catalogued 11 years ago as forfeit property and recovered 4 days ago by a table writ from a mandate evidence vault that threw away nothing. Item 906 on a seizure manifest. 1 ship, model, printed, no assessed value. The provost had recorded everything. The record gave everything back. "That's the spindrift," said the welder, in a voice that had crossed 11 years and a stripped registry, and an administratively simplified childhood without once putting the cargo down. "That's mine. Dad printed it. There's a bad seam on the port side skid where the printer hiccuped, and he said we don't hide flaws in this family. We log them." And then she was not a stranger at all. She was Bren, 9 years old and 20 at once, sitting down hard on the top stair with the model in both hands, and Wren sat down next to her little sister on a metal staircase at the cold end of nowhere, put an arm around her, and finished the quote the way it had been finished at the family table for 30 years, the way their father said it. "We log them, and then we know our ship better than the yard that built her." The band carried some of it, not all of it. Some lading is private. It took the rest of the year to gather the 31 and the 2,000 smaller things. The contracts reinstated with seniority. The restitution account that none of them quite knew how to look at. The recovered forfeit property arriving in numbered crates like a museum. Returning a family, and through all of it in the background the accord kept changing pitch. The review of the 811 began, docket by docket, and the first vacated condemnation that wasn't theirs came through within 2 months. A Tarsk line, struck 40 years ago on a falsified cargo claim, restored on the primary record after a consular team taught their delegation Earth's method. The band started calling the method by a name, the way bands do. They called it pulling a Calder, and Halloran sent her the clip with no comment, and Wren watched it in a wardroom and thought of Brell with his blunt claw on her first discrepancy report, 50 years of yard ledgers behind his whetstone eyes. The trick of it, little cutter, is that most things are written by more than one hand. She went back to Cask before the year turned because there was one account left open. Hollow Reach was Hollow Reach still, Sodium Light, Dirty Tin Sky, the eternal shriek of plate saws. But the tally office had a new annex now, and the surety boards above the intake desk were dark. Switched off pending the review, 811 dockets working their way down through the law that had filled this yard for a century. Brell was older, slower, grayer at the joints, and entirely unsurprised to see her, because Brell had watched the feed from the span like everyone else in the accord, standing in his own yard among 10,000 of the condemned, watching the third kind of bondholder he had ever seen stand at the filer's rail and crack the world. "Master Hale," he rumbled, And then, with the deliberation of a being correcting a ledger entry that had waited years for its correction. Master called her, Yardmaster. She put a folio on his desk, not the great folio, a thin one. I came to settle what I owe this office. You owe this office nothing. The debt cleared. I stamped it myself. Not that one. She opened the folio. Inside was a lane auxiliary instrument of appointment, drawn by the training office, signed by the Consul General of Earth as sponsor of record. The Accord's first formal school of documentary audit, to be established at Port Ember, charged with training clerks of all banners in the verification of record against instrument, the method, taught in the open to everyone forever. The first line of the founding syllabus had been left for its honorary chair to write. They want a sentence to put over the door, Wren said. I told them it wasn't mine to give. The old Tarsk read the appointment twice, slowly, claw under the lines, exactly as he had read her first discrepancy 13 years ago. Then he took up his stylus and in the heavy, careful, beautiful script of a species that reveres a clean ledger above its gods, Brell of Hollow Reach wrote the sentence that 10,000 clerks of 7 species would eventually copy out on their first day of training and slid it back across the desk with something in his stone eyes that on any softer species would have been called shining. A ledger is a ship that never sinks. There was one more lading to clear before the family's books balanced, and Wren did it quietly, without cameras. In the second month of the new year, she went to the client worlds of the Six. The Six Fallen of the Serene Shelf, the Borrowed Dead, the Maintenance Accident Crews, whose files Sand had dressed in battle honors to conjure a massacre, had families too, and the table's decree had ordered them told the truth and compensated, and the mandate, grinding through its own penance with the thoroughness of a fleet that intended never to repeat this audit, had done it by registered dispatch. Wren thought registered dispatch was not how you told a mother that her son's death had been spent 11 years ago as ammunition against strangers. So she went herself, with a mandate liaison and a translator and no band feed at all, to 6 doors on 3 cold worlds, and stood in 6 front rooms that all kept a folded gray banner somewhere with a name under it, and said the same thing 6 times in careful Kesser. Your dead were honest. They died of bad luck and hard work. A man borrowed them to break my family, and my family has come to give them back. 5 of the 6 households received her with the stiff, bewildered courtesy of people handed a grief they had already buried once. The 6th was different. The 6th was the mother of a reactor tech, a small, fierce gray woman in a machinist's apron, who listened to the whole of it without moving and then said, I stood watch at that memorial every Remembrance Day for 11 years. I felt proud. They made me feel proud of a lie. That is a theft I have no word for. She looked up at Wren with eyes like Brell's, like wet stone. You have a word for it, human. Your kind put a word on the whole ban. Say it for me. Discrepancy, said Wren, and the old machinist nodded once. Slowly, like a judge, and the 2 of them, the surveyor's daughter and the reactor tech's mother, both robbed by the same 41 seconds of testimony, drank a cup of bitter Kesser tea together in a kitchen at the end of the lanes, and nothing else in the entire 11 years ever felt more like the case closing. The galaxy, meanwhile, was learning its new arithmetic. It was not the lesson the old fleets had braced for. Earth asked for no seats, no lanes, no tonnage concessions. The restitution went to the Calders and the Six, not to Earth's treasury. The consulate's only institutional demand in the whole settlement was the audit school at Port Ember, which it then handed to the Accord entire, syllabus and method and all, free, the way you hand someone a lamp. And that, the old fleets came to understand, was precisely the message, and it was the coldest message any of them had ever been sent. Earth had not built a weapon it could be disarmed of. It had built a habit and taught it to everyone, and now every banner's registry clerks were learning to check the record against the ground, and every fleet in the Accord now lived under the working assumption the mandate had purchased at such expense. Somewhere, patient as orbit, there is a clerk with a copy, and the copy does not forget, and the copy has time. The Kesser First Warden put it best, as she put most things best. At the closing session of the reckoning, asked by the band what the serene audit had taught the great fleets about humanity, Vakas Oran considered the question for a long moment with her fronds of office newly heavy on her shoulders and said, We measured them when they joined. Smallest fleet of the 7 banners. We logged the measurement and stopped watching. The instruments were accurate. It was the smallest fleet. We simply measured the wrong thing. They do not build their wrath out of hulls. They build it out of memory, and they have never once decommissioned a memory in their history. 11 years for one family of 38. Pray your banner never owes them a name. Wren watched that clip exactly once. In the family's new hall on Meridian Station, leased back, the same deck, the same hatch numbers. Her mother had insisted with an auditor's precision in all things, and then she switched it off because the band's verdicts were the band's business, and the family had a keel to lay. The vote had been held at the long table, the whole remnant line present or patched in from 6 stations, 31 squares of light and presence, with 2 chairs kept empty on purpose, and a brass plotting caliper lying on the table in front of Wren's place. Recovered from an evidence crate, item 412, no assessed value. The question was what the Calder line did now, with its registry restored, its seniority intact, its restitution account obscene, and 11 years of holes shot through it. They could retire every one of them for 3 generations. Issa Calder, presiding because some things outrank rank, had let the silence run its course and then said, "We are surveyors. The record says so." And Tam had grinned, and Bren had flipped down an imaginary welding hood, and the vote had not really been a vote at all. They built her at Tessevar because Wren insisted on Tessevar, the same client yard that had once relined a Corvette's guilty guns and saved the invoice, the yard whose folded archive had given her Exhibit 11. The yard had been bought out of mandate receivership by its own workers since, and it needed the contract, and there was a symmetry in it that satisfied the bookkeeper in her soul. The place that had kept the truth about the guns would lay the keel of what came after them. Tam ran the build like a man who had spent 11 years rehearsing without knowing it, foreman of the hull gangs, fluent in the yard's own cant. Bren welded the seams she was certified for and inspected the ones she wasn't, and on the port side landing skid, where the printer of a little gray and blue model had hiccuped 23 years ago, she laid a single, deliberate bead a half-millimeter proud, logged it in the build record as intentional, signature Bren Calder, and dared anyone at the yard to ask. They named her Spindrift too, and they did not hold a ceremony, because the family had had enough of broadcasts. They held a dinner in the fitting-out berth instead, 31 plates and 2 empty chairs, and Miriam Osi came, and Teo Halloran, gray now at 42 and godfather by acclamation to 2 of the cousins' children, and an old Tarsk yardmaster who had crossed 4 jumps for the first off-moon journey of his life and pronounced the tally office of the new ship, after inspection, adequate, which from Brell was a decoration with clusters. And 11 months later, on a bright watch morning by the ship's clock, the survey vessel Spindrift 2, Calder Survey Registry, all contracts current, all lading attested, dropped out of her final jump at the edge of a gray system at the end of a quiet lane and fell inward toward a barren moon and the long mineral shadow of the serene shelf. The lane was theirs the whole way in. The table's decree had restored the family's original claim priority, suspended 11 years in the registry's amber. The mandate picket corridors in the sector had been redrawn by treaty, pulled back 40,000 kilometers, the exact width of a lie, and the Accord had declared the close approaches of the shelf a registered memorial lane, so that every hull that ever passed would log, in its own incorruptible cores, the position of a debris field that the salvage guilds had surveyed, catalogued, and then, at Earth's formal request, left exactly where it lay. Wren brought the ship in herself, hands quiet on the board, her mother in the second seat running the survey rig her husband had once meant to train his brother on, Tam at engineering, Bren on the hull watch, and the rest of the crew, the rest of the family, which is what the crew of a Calder keel had been for 6 generations and would be again. They crossed the survey grid her father had flown, line by line, the instruments drinking the shelf's riches in long, calm passes, and nobody said very much, because the ship herself was saying it, lines green, all boards, hour after hour, the simple, unanswerable testimony of a working vessel doing lawful work in open registry space where no one would ever hunt her dark again. At the grid's heart over the debris field, they went to station keeping and stopped the rig and held 30 fathoms of silence for 6 names, Davin Rolf Marin, O.C., the core tech, the Vasquez brothers, and for Etta's far grave and the aunt and the 4 cousins and the uncle with the quiet heart, the whole price of the 41 seconds, paid out in full and entered, every line of it, in the registry where the Accord keeps what it can never again pretend not to know. Then Wren opened the claim channel. The filing assembled itself on her board the way it had assembled itself in her head 10,000 times in bunks and watch rooms and a paint locker full of waste bales. Calder survey, serene shelf, Keller load, coordinates, assay summary attached, the same packet, the daughter's instruments agreeing with the father's across 11 years to the 4th decimal, because the shelf had waited and the instruments do not drift from the truth, only from each other. The registry handshake came back green. Transmission ready. Voice attestation required by Accord law, master of record. Her mother looked over from the second seat. The ship held her station, steady as a stamped seal. Wren keyed the channel and finished her father's sentence. This is Wren Calder, master of Spindrift 2, attesting survey true and claim lawful. In completion of transmission begun by Davin Calder, master of Spindrift, 11 years, 8 months, and 9 days ago from this position. The packet follows complete, she breathed once, and for the registry's permanent record, appended per the master's discretion. My family was condemned by a closed record and freed by a true one. Earth held the difference open for 11 years. To whoever audits this entry, in whatever century. The lesson of the Serene Shelf is 9 seconds long. We are a small fleet and a long memory. We file our claims. We keep our copies. And we always come back for our names. She sent it. The claim crossed 40,000 kilometers of clean space and posted to the Accord Registry, without challenge, complete, 11 years late and exact to the gram, and the confirmation pinged back onto the Spindrift 2's bridge like a sounding off a far hull received, recorded Calder. The record was open. The record was theirs. The record at very long last was true. Claims posted, said Ren Calder, surveyor, to her ship and her family and the 6 quiet names outside the viewport, and brought the rig back online for the next pass. Because the shelf was rich, the boards were green, and the family had work. Log it.